Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right. Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. I'm going to be joined today by Jake Kocorowski of Bucky's Fifth Quarter to talk about the first game against Western Kentucky and what we might see for the Badgers over these next couple weeks before Big Ten play begins. And then we're also going to be joined by wide receiver A.J. Taylor to talk about his first game and how he's handling the start of the season here with Danny Davis and Quintez Cephas not in the lineup. But let's jump right into our interview with Jake. We are here with Jake Kocorowski from Bucky's Fifth Quarter. I did say that right, Jake, right?
You said it perfectly.
And it's your first appearance on the Red Zone. I don't know why we haven't done this before. I guess I just got in a rotation, but I'm glad you're here.
I appreciate it, man. No, it's all good. It's heck, I've been busy working 2 jobs, so now that's kind of taking care of itself. No, I'm happy to be on, man. Appreciate it, and love the show.
Well, I'm glad you're a listener now. You can be a participant as well. But yeah, I guess we'll talk about this. Jump into this first game here for the Badgers. You know, I thought the defense was kind of surprisingly good. I know it's only Western Kentucky, and you know, if a couple red zone possessions go the other way, then maybe it doesn't look as good as the 3 points they allowed. But I thought a lot of the newcomers looked really good. What were your kind of first impressions of the defense?
Yeah, I mean, they gave up 305 yards, but, you know, the last 2 drives when mostly reserves were in, I think they gave up over 100. So, the first team defense played extremely, I would say, stout. You liked what you saw out of the corners and the secondary. 3 out of the 4 started their first game, and for Scott Nelson and Fan Hicks playing their first ever collegiate game, and you saw them step up huge. Hicks with that huge interception off the bad trick play, the gadget play they had, where the ball hung up in the air, and then you had Nelson tied for the team leading tackles with 7, and had a couple of pass breakups, and he'll tell you that he should have had that interception in the first quarter. But yeah, I thought overall it was a solid showing, and compared to what you've seen from other Big Ten teams, and now it's only the first game for that, but Michigan State, which was playing at the same time as Wisconsin, and then also Penn State going up against Appalachian State, I think Wisconsin fans should be pretty happy with that performance.
Just off topic here, but you mentioned the trick play, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but I just am not a fan of trick plays inside the 10-yard line.
I mean, we've seen it before, where even from Wisconsin back in the day, where Monty Ball would throw it to Russell Wilson, or it was the 2012 Big Ten championship game, I think, if I'm not mistaken, fans, where Kurt Phillips caught a pass from Jared Abbrederis, who himself was a prep quarterback. So I think that was close in the red zone area. That's when you tell a team's trying to get maybe a little, I won't say desperate, but they're trying to find a way to get some points on the board because they feel that they can't find the end zone through conventional means. Now, They did have those 2 chunk plays before, that was a couple drives before that. They had the large chunk plays defensively on the 2 pass plays, so they could drive the ball down that field off some mistakes, but, the drive after was when the interception for Hicks happened. And, yeah, sometimes you trick them, but you also saw it against Wisconsin and Michael Dieter doing it last year, where catching that pass and going into the end zone. So it'll be interesting. You'll see what other teams can do, and especially with New Mexico coming up, just how, more of a spread look, some option, zone reading. It'll be another challenge for them.
They definitely do work sometimes. It's just a personal preference for me, I guess. Yeah. It just inside the 10, you're already so close, why risk it? But I guess that's just me. I'm
all about the fullback. I'm all about the fullback dives from inside the 10-yard line on. I'll be honest with you. I'm all about fullbacks, folks.
Yeah, I love Wisconsin's fullback dive. It's the most predictable play. 3rd and 1, it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about
it. Exactly.
What new player or new starter kind of stood out to you on defense? Maybe more than anybody else. Was there one guy in particular that maybe stood out to you?
I would have to say I'm still looking at the secondary. I think Nelson takes the cake when it, a new starter there, where we saw flashes on the practices that were open to the media where he made interceptions. He had 3 or 4 that were open in those practices that were open to the media. I thought he really popped. But I think Caesar Williams, I really like how the redshirt sophomore stepped up. He overall played very well. Was tight in coverage from rewatching the film and watching it. Obviously, I'm not a coach or anything. I'm sure we'll be when we talk to defensive coordinator Jimmy Leonard in just about hour or so. We'll hear more about his thoughts about the secondary play. But I thought he really stood out, and I would say honorable mention Zach Bond had 5 tackles. I thought he made some nice plays too.
Yeah, I think for me it's probably Caesar Williams. He was a guy that I think at the beginning of this offseason I was kind of more on the we kind of all thought Dante Carey-Williams would be a starter, and for that other spot I was sort of on the Faion Hicks train for a good while, and then as fall camp progressed here I really started to like Williams, and he went out there and I thought played really well. Per Pro Football Focus he was targeted 7 times but only allowed 2 catches for 17 yards, so I thought he made some really nice plays out there. So I guess some news that just broke actually is that Patrick Johnson has left the team. Now this is another, this is kind of becoming a trend of guys leaving the team a little bit here with Kerry Williams and then Farrar, last week. But from everything we know right now, Johnson is just for personal reasons. It's not discipline or anything like that. But how much does this hurt their safety depth, do you think? It feels like, he wasn't a starter, but you have a true freshman like Reggie Pearson that can play a little bit more now. But it seemed like, he was possibly the Dixon replacement for next year.
Right, you saw last year, right, where you had Dakota Dixon, Natrell Jamerson, and then also Joe Ferguson, and how Ferguson stepped up when Dixon was injured and tied for the team lead in interceptions. And this year, I felt Johnson could have been that same role, like you mentioned, for that, to help Dixon if he would get injured. And it's big because during fall camp, I remember Leonard telling us that there were 3 safeties that separated themselves. It was Nelson, it was Dixon, and then Patrick Johnson. And he, you saw he was in spring, he was working with Nelson when Dixon was out. Those reps really helped him. You saw some good things from him in fall camp, although it wasn't necessarily flashy as Nelson, and Leonard mentioned as such. So I think it's a huge hit, because even though he was injured and out last week with a head injury, especially from UW, that safety depth now, you do have Pearson, who's questionable this week on the preliminary injury report, but then there's also Eric Burrell, who stepped up, had a forced fumble on a big hit towards the goal line to negate any scoring opportunities, to thwart that scoring chance for the Hilltoppers last weekend. He'll have to step up, and he's got game experience too. Remember, he was sort of and we saw it during fall camp too, he was the third safety in those packages against 2 to 3 tight end sets. He would come in, and he did that against Iowa last year as well. So he's got that game experience there. But when you hear a defensive coordinator say that 3 safeties separated themselves in fall camp early on, it was mid-camp, it's going to be a big hit. It's going to be, I think, if there's injuries there, what many thought that safety position was, a little bit deeper than the corner, maybe like other positions like a defensive end where they're still figuring it out, even though Henningsen and Lyles played solid last week. I think that depth takes a hit, and if there's injuries, that could be a concern. Yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing is, if somebody if one of those 2 starters gets injured, then especially if it's Dixon, then you're in a lot worse situation than you were if Johnson were there. And next year too, I think it could have a big effect with Dixon leaving and Johnson seemingly being the more natural strong safety type fit of those guys remaining. So we'll have to see, if once we get more information on him, if it's if they're able to figure out a replacement for him. But you mentioned the defensive line and the defensive ends. It looks like they're probably going to get Isaiahh Loudermilk back this week, which is I think a really big. Could be a really big boost for them. You mentioned that Henningsen and Lyles played solid, and I pretty much agree with that. But going back and watching the game again, they only played 3 defensive linemen until the third quarter. The entire first half, they just had 3 guys. Songapolu played every snap until mid to late in the third quarter, and so it just seems like that depth just isn't really there like you want it to be right now with such a young group. And adding Loudermilk's not only a big upgrade in the starting lineup, but could add a lot of depth as well. What do you kind of think Loudermilk can bring to this defense? Obviously it's a defensive line that's been a big talking point this offseason. What do you kind of like about Loudermilk and what he can bring?
You saw glimpses last year. There's a hint of a pass rushing a skill set there with him. He had 1.5 sacks, only played 11 games due to some injuries, and I think he'll provide obviously more stability at the position where now you have a rotating in where you have, if he does come back, I know they're talking about seeing how they respond back to the volume, even though Paul Chris said that they were essentially, him and Xander Neville were cleared to play on Monday, but it really comes down to, there's a pass rushing threat a little bit more where you didn't really see a lot of that on Friday. Granted, it's against a team that's quick, the up tempo, it's hard to get those pressures and whatnot, but I think there's definitely an ability for them to get a little bit more pass rush there. I like again, the depth there where you'll have Henningsen, you'll have Lyles, you'll have potentially Volpel, and then of course Loudermilk there where you have maybe that you're starting to see where the 4 lineman rotation could come in where you saw last year where you had Alec James, Chikwe Obashi, Connor Sheehy, and then Loudermilk too, so you have kind of a set 4. And we'll see what happens with, perchance, a nickel sub package, right? Maybe Sangapolu doesn't have to be out there in those, sub packages, and maybe you see Loudermilk slide inside alongside Henningsen or someone else or Volpel or whatnot, or even Sangapolu there too if you want to get those guys up there where they can put a little bit more pressure and Jim Leonard can mix and match and find the personnel to create that pressure.
Yeah, and I think Henningsen and Lyles are more in the run-stopping mold.
Absolutely.
To have both those guys starting, it does maybe affect your pass rush, and like you said, Loudermilk can really provide that. I guess we'll move on to the offense now. Everyone was kind of, I don't know, the first quarter, and everyone was kind of like, well, this isn't really starting too well offensively. Everyone kind of expected them to go out there and just light up the scoreboard against this Western Kentucky team, but it wasn't really that easy for them. Now they are missing Danny Davis still and Quintez Cephas, obviously, and I think Xander Neville not being there certainly affects the run game. But what were your kind of impressions of the offense for the first time in a game, and is there any reason for worry that they didn't go out there and put up 50 points against that team, or do you think it's just they just kind of work their way into the season?
I think it's just it's something that obviously they're going to work on, and even talking to like Garrett Groshek where he said he missed some assignments when I talked to him yesterday. I mean, it's the first game of the year. They won 34-3. Yeah, do fans want to get more points? Obviously they do, and they against a 4-2-5 type defense that Western Kentucky that was their base, or at least what you saw in the game notes. There are things to clean up, and it's the first game of the year, but also remember last year it was 10-10 halftime in the season opener with Utah State. I think I
completely forgot about that.
I know, it feels so long ago. I'll be honest with you guys, like covering this team now for 4 years, like it's amazing how long a season ago feels. Like, oh yeah, remember last year? You don't, but I think there are still a lot of positives. You saw the explosiveness, that second drive of the game, the first play where he goes Jonathan Taylor goes 47 yards, and there's some great blocking there. I mean, you see the signs of promise where a guy like Jake Ferguson, 4 receptions, all first downs, 2 came on third down, but he also blocks, and he blocked well in that first touchdown run, and on the second one in that second quarter from Taylor on the 30-yard scamper, you saw him lead out there, and Taylor just fouled him to the end zone. So there's obvious things to clean up. The sacks, they had 3 sacks against, Wisconsin gave up 3 sacks to Western Kentucky. I think overall, though, there are things to build on, and I mean there are things to clean up. I'm not necessarily too concerned, and if you do get Xander Neville back, he can only help in that run game, because when you were down both Luke Benchwell and Neville, which were kind of more of the inline, what you normally know as the Y inline type tight ends, it makes a huge difference. And you even saw that maybe in the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State last year when Neville was out.
Yeah, and it seems like it is pretty likely they're going to get Neville back this week. I mean, he's listed as questionable, but Paul Chris sounded really optimistic on Monday. They're going to kind of see how he takes it this week. And kind of the same with Loudermilk. I think both of them returning this week, they don't necessarily need Neville or Loudermilk to win this game against New Mexico, but allowing those guys to work their way in now rather than work their way in against, in a tough road game at Iowa, I think is really big. And from a tight end perspective, last game, they looked pretty good without Neville, and Benshaw went out. in the first half, and they had to use Logan Bruss as a blocking tight end. But I thought Peniston and Ferguson were pretty good in the run game as well, and Ferguson obviously had a lot of big catches. Were you pretty encouraged by the tight end position overall, even without Neville?
I think so. With the depth that they had and the hits that they've taken, like you said, with Neville and then Benchel going out during the game, the key with Mickey Turner, I remember him telling us, and we all know this for a fact anyways, that Wisconsin, you can catch, but as a tight end, you have to block. And seeing Peniston and you seeing Ferguson block as well as they did and opening up some holes, I think there's a lot to build off of. And then, like I said, you do have Logan Bruss as kind of that jumbo tight end, taking Neville's number like Cole Van Lanen did last year for those type of packages. I think Wisconsin fans should be really happy. I think people are more ecstatic off of Jake Ferguson. I know the hype's kind of there for Ferguson. We've all talked about the big spring he had, and then into fall camp he had a solid one. I thought Kyle Peniston had a great fall camp for that matter, and you didn't necessarily see the results of that on the field on Friday, which some people were asking me questions about that. I think it's just a matter, he'll find his way. I'm sure Hornibrook's going to find him at some point. It was just Jake Ferguson's night with being in that 11 personnel out of the shotgun on third down, had a couple of receptions there, and I think there's room to grow, but without those two of the four main tight ends on the depth chart, I think Wisconsin and that group handled themselves really well.
Yeah, and Peniston's not going to get talked about in that game, but I thought he did. I thought he was a good blocker in that game, and that's kind of the one thing that's held him back a little bit. He does have the natural receiving ability, and he can do fulfill that role. But I think that's one of the big things he's been trying to do is become a better blocker, become a more complete tight end. And I thought he looked pretty good in the run game. Now obviously he didn't get the catches that Ferguson did, but I think no one's going to necessarily see what Peniston did in that game. But I thought he had a decent game, regardless of not really contributing in the passing game. So I guess I just want to get that out there. But I thought Cole Van Lanen played really well too. We don't really know what's going on with John Dietzen. Didn't really play in the second half at all. They won't really say if he's injured or not. But from Van Lanen's perspective, or from an offensive line perspective, how often, they came in with so much hype. How optimistic are you after, one game that they can kind of fulfill that potential and be one of the best lines we've seen here?
I think the potential is definitely there. I know we've talked about it on I wouldn't say ad nauseum, but we've talked about just comparing to other lines, like the 2011 line or the 2010 offensive line. This group, with the three All-Americans, the freshman All-American, they have that potential. And, it was just the first game, but they ran the ball relatively well. There's things to clean up. I think Cole Van Lanen has that opportunity to really, down the road, cement himself as a left tackle. If there's some injury down the line with Dietzen, I was encouraged by his play, and Paul Christ mentioned that he thought Van Lanen played very well on Friday. So, I think with either or, they have the opportunity to really make themselves, obviously they're the best line in the Big Ten, I think arguably the nation. We'll see what they do. I still think there's some things they can clean up, obviously, but a lot of things, though, too. You're seeing a lot of 8-man boxes against this team, and they still had, the run, the 47-yard touchdown run, the 30-yard runs, where teams are going to target that running game, and obviously Alex Hornibrook is going to try to gash them through the opponents through the air, and he did so with 257 yards and a couple touchdowns on Friday. So, but you're going to see teams try to stop that. The bread and butter of the Wisconsin offense, which is the run game, and I think they responded well on Friday. I think they'll continue to grow. I can probably tell you that they still feel like there's things that they can clean up too, like everyone in the first game. But the potential's there, and you have a stable of backs that are versatile as well, and not just Jonathan Taylor, but I'm really high on Taiwan Deal. And if they can, I think both of them, Taylor and Deal, can take advantage of the blocks and make things happen.
Yeah, I was pretty encouraged by Taiwan Deal. Looked really good in that first game. I hope he can stay healthy. That's kind of the big thing with him.
Yeah, almost over 6.5 yards per carry, 53 yards on 8 carries. Even a reception out of the backfield. So it's a positive development for the redshirt senior. And I think the key word, key two words, stay healthy.
Yeah, and I think the passing game is obviously going to get better too. I mean, Danny Davis isn't there right now. We don't really know if Cephas is going to come back at all, but But I think if you add Davis to this and you have Pryor, Taylor, Davis, I thought, Jack Dunn played relatively well, but if you have those top three guys, then and I thought Hornibrook played pretty well. He had a couple passes where he, maybe threw it in a spot he shouldn't have, but I thought he played relatively well. Didn't turn the ball over, which is, a really key thing after throwing 15 interceptions last year. So I'm guessing you're still pretty optimistic about this passing game too.
I am. I think that the development of the tight end, I think with Ferguson as a potential option now, like I said, it's just one game. He could have 0 catches the next couple of weeks. We'll see what the game plan is that Paul Christ and Joe Rudolph, devise for New Mexico and BYU coming up in non-conference play. But I think you're optimistic by what Kendric Pryor did, and also A.J. Taylor bouncing back. He had those 2 early drops. Comes back, gets hit in traffic with watching that hit again on replay. Being sandwiched between the 2 defenders, he came back strong on that note. And Dunn had a nice 20-yard some odd catch as well in that second quarter. So I thought that's positive. The big thing too, talking to Dunn after the game, he was just happy to have his first punt return, or catching the first punt, having the first reception out of the way, and now okay, I'm done with that. Now I can continue to focus. Adam Krumholtz did the same thing where he had his first career reception on Friday. So I'm optimistic. I think there's still room to grow with this team, and if they do get Davis back next week for BYU, I think that'll open up the offense further and whatnot too. Giving them another deep threat, a player that can make contested catches. Not even though I think Pryor has that ability, and Taylor showed that he can make plays like that as well on Friday.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see where this team is after a couple more games heading into conference play, and if they can if they can kind of pick it up these next 2 games and going into that Iowa game. A lot of people think that's going to be a tough game, especially if it's at night. So I'm curious to see how this team develops over the next 2 weeks. But thanks for coming on, Jake. I forgot to look at your Twitter handle and what it is before this. Can you say where people can follow you on Twitter?
Yeah, follow us on at B5Q, which is the Bucky's Fifth Quarter handle, and then follow me on Twitter at Jake Koco, Koco B5Q. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Had a tough practice?
Yeah,
You're just dripping sweat right now.
Oh my gosh, tough practice grinder. Ended with 2 minute. They got me.
Ended on 2 minute.
Yeah. That was a heartfelt win. We scored at the end, so that was good. But that was a tough drive.
You guys had a good 2 minute drill on Friday too.
Yeah.
You guys just trying to work to go as up tempo as possible on those, I guess.
Yeah. We practice we just practice it. We practice it a lot. Just getting ready for those moments, to be ready to step up when we're 2 minutes, when we're tired, and just stay mentally focused. And it's a grind in practice, but it makes it a little bit easier in games. But yeah, we see it pay off. It paid off. So you got to grind through these.
Probably intentional that you guys did that at the very end of practice when you're already tired, right?
Yeah, for sure. In games, you never know what's going to be going on, but you do know most likely you'll be a little tired, and you're going to have to really focus up.
What have you seen from Kendric's side? I was talking to Kendric a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the first year he came in, he kind of took him a little while to learn the playbook. Mm-hmm. He felt like he eventually redshirted, maybe a lot of because of that. And then this last fall camp, he had the moped accident that really set him back. But he feels like this is sort of the first year nothing's really been holding him back at all. Do you kind of see that from him? Do you feel like he's sort of coming into his own and kind of playing more free out there this season?
For sure. I definitely see he's a lot more comfortable with things. He kind of knows, the game's slowing down for him. He did have a couple things hold him back, the last couple of years, but now I think he's getting to that point where he can just kind of let it loose. Doesn't have to worry about that, all the other, mess that goes on with it. He can just play. So it's really good to see.
What makes him such a good receiver in your mind?
He's an athlete. He can catch really well. He's quick. He's fast. Not faster than me, but he's a fast dude. And he's just like an athlete all around.
Does he think he's faster than you?
He does. I don't know. I think that accident, messed his head up a little bit, but he's not.
Have you guys ever just straight up raced?
Yes, we have. We did freshman year.
Did you beat him?
Yeah, I did. You can ask him. He will admit that.
So he hasn't forgotten that.
He hasn't forgotten that.
How do you feel like your first game went? You led the team in receiving, but did have a couple drops.
Yeah, I had a couple drop passes. I think it's more of it was good to get it out the way. I had a pretty good game. I don't even think about the drops. It happens, and I know I'm gonna get better. I know I can catch, so I'm not really worried about that. But overall, I think I had a pretty good game. But there's always stuff to work on.
Do you feel like you and Kendric felt the need to really step up as far as leadership goes when you have a couple guys like Quintez and Danny that are not around these first couple weeks? So when they got suspended, did you feel like the need for you and Kendric to kind of step up in the room?
Yeah, you always know that when some guys are leaving, that somebody has to step up. But we were kind of like everybody. We were kind of planning on doing it regardless, like without the situation, with the situation. We had I talked to Ken and I'd be like, and Danny and all of us. We need to dominate this year, and we do need to step up. And after it happened, after they're gone, we definitely said, we gotta work, we gotta grind, we gotta lead this receiver, we gotta show him. We talk about it all the time. We joke about it. We always talk about the number one, O-line, number one running back, and all that stuff. But we gotta make something known for the receivers.
I feel like you guys still sort of have something to prove. The offensive line is as touted as they are, and like you said, Jonathan's the Heisman candidate. But people have been building up you guys as receivers too this offseason. But do you feel like you still have something to prove as a group to kind of make that come to fruition and show that you guys really are one of the more talented receiving cores around? For sure.
I don't know necessarily if we're trying to prove it to anybody else but ourselves that we can be top receiver core. So it's not necessarily we're trying to prove it to NCAA or college teams. It's just between our receiver core, we want to be the best.
Yeah. As an offense, what do you think you guys need to do better moving forward these next few games? I think a lot of people expected you guys to go out there and just put up 60 points in the first game because everyone's been talking about how great you guys are offensively. Yeah. But what do you guys feel like you need to kind of work on?
Really, it's just playing together, playing more football together, just coming together as a whole. I don't think we necessarily. We had some mess ups, but like I said, with football, it's gonna come when everybody's trying to be great. You're thinking little things. Just everybody's little, different. But as we come together and as we play more together, I think we'll mold into that team. I guess everybody thinks we'll be.
All right, thanks, AJ.
No problem.
That's going to do it for this week. A big thanks to Jake and AJ for coming on. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, you can do so on iTunes or Google Play. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway. We're going to have a live Twitter chat on Saturday after the New Mexico game, so be on the lookout for that. And keep visiting madison.com for all your Badgers football coverage. Thanks for listening.